Rain makes the street shine like it's been wiped clean. It hasn't. Cars pass, water hisses, people keep moving like nothing can touch them. Officer_EC, calm, focused male officer, early 30s, medium athletic build, defined jawline, short textured dark hair, light stubble, slightly tired eyes, natural skin texture with pores, tactical police uniform with subtle wear marks, grounded, realistic expression, stands across from a glass front clinic and never stands in the brightest light. K9_Shadow, black and tan German Shepherd, black saddle pattern, black facial mask, golden tan fur, upright alert ears, amber eyes, small notch on left ear, muscular structure, realistic fur texture, tactical K9 harness, sits close, quiet, measuring. Inside is warm, too warm. Across the street, a man waits without fidgeting. No phone, no smoke. K9 breath changes, a low vibration. The watcher shifts, just enough to see through the glass. Philadelphia wasn't in this story, not this time. This city wore a different kind of mask, one that smiled while it watched you bleed. Rain had been falling since sundown, not hard enough to flood the gutters, just steady enough to polish the street into a black mirror. Every traffic light became a smeared ribbon on the asphalt. Every passing car dragged a hiss of water behind it, like a whisper that didn't want witnesses. Officer Ethan Cole stood under the shallow awning across from Moore Animal Forensics, hands in the pockets of a plain gray jacket, body still in a way that looked casual if you didn't know what you were seeing. If you did know, you'd notice the weight on his back foot, the slight angle of his shoulders, the fact that he never stood directly under the brightest patch of light. K9 Shadow waited at his left knee, close enough that Ethan could feel the dog's heat through his jeans. Shadow's ears made small adjustments, micro-movements that tracked changes in the environment the way a compass needle tracks a magnet. The clinic was warm behind its glass frontage. Too warm. A soft target pretending it wasn't. Glass was honesty. Glass said, "Here's who's inside." Ethan didn't like honesty in the wrong neighborhood. Dr. Lena Moore moved behind the front desk with the quiet efficiency of someone who had cleaned blood out of fur and told owners the truth they didn't want. Her hair was tied back, her sleeves were rolled. She held herself like she didn't belong to the world outside this building, like she had built a small pocket of sanity and refused to let the city rewrite it. But the city always tried. The watcher was across the street, half hidden behind a parked delivery van. He'd been there long enough for the rain to darken his shoulders, not smoking, not checking his phone, just waiting. Waiting was a skill. Waiting was intent. Shadow's nostrils flared once. A low, nearly silent sound left his throat, more vibration than noise. Ethan didn't look at Shadow. He didn't need to. He watched the watcher. The man shifted, not to leave, not to stretch. He shifted to see better through the clinic's glass. That was the tell. Ethan's brain built a model, line of sight, time to cross, angle of entry, what he could do with his hands if the man tried something, and Ethan had no uniform to protect him from questions later. He was on leave, not the kind that meant beaches and cheap beer. The kind that meant a department made you sit still because you'd been too sharp for too long and someone above you was afraid you'd snap in public. Ethan hadn't snapped. He'd just gotten quieter. He touched Shadow's harness. 2 fingers, a pressure point, a signal. Wait. The clinic's door opened. Lena stepped out with a tote bag slung over one shoulder, keys in hand. She paused, scanning the street like she could feel the city's attention the way some people feel weather changes in their bones. Ethan moved then, not fast, not dramatic. He simply crossed at the corner with a normal pedestrian's pace, closing distance without announcing himself as a problem. Lena's eyes found him, recognized the posture, the controlled stillness. "Officer Cole," she said softly, like saying it out loud might pull a thread and unravel the night. "Doc," he replied. Behind him, the watcher eased away from the van. The movement was subtle. It wasn't the movement of a man going home. It was the movement of a man adjusting to a new variable. Ethan turned just enough to let the man see his face. The watcher froze for half a second, then kept walking, past the clinic, past Ethan, past Lena, like he'd never been there at all. Ethan watched him until he disappeared around the corner. Lena's voice came tighter. "You've seen him before." "Not him," Ethan said, "but his kind." Shadow's ears were still pointed toward the corner the man had taken. Shadow didn't bark, didn't lunge. He just stayed anchored to Ethan's leg like a living warning sign. Lena exhaled slowly. "I can call Maria." "We will," Ethan said. "In the morning." Lena's eyes narrowed. "Why not now?" Ethan looked at the clinic, at the glass, at the warm lights. "Because I don't want her driving down here at midnight in rain, and because I don't want whoever that was to see a marked unit pull up and know he got under your skin." Lena's jaw worked like she wanted to argue and didn't have the breath. Ethan didn't blame her. If you spent your life making animals stop suffering, it was hard to accept that humans sometimes chose suffering on purpose. He nodded toward her car. "You got someone walking you home?" "I live upstairs," she said. Ethan's gaze lifted to the second-floor windows, curtains drawn, dim light, one point of entry from the alley side if someone wanted it. Shadow made a soft sound again. Ethan's fingers tightened on the harness. "No," Ethan said, answering the question she hadn't asked. "You're not going upstairs alone." Lena looked like she was about to protest out of pride. Then she glanced at the wet street, the empty sidewalk, the way the city silence could turn predatory if you let it. She unlocked the clinic again. "Fine, 5 minutes. I grab my bag, and we—" "Stay behind me," Ethan said. Not unkind, just certain. Inside, the smell of antiseptic and warm air hit him. It felt wrong, like a hospital shouldn't be this exposed. He walked the perimeter with his eyes. Glass, glass, glass. Back door with an old lock. Hinges that had seen too many winters. A side window near the supply room that could be popped if someone didn't care about noise. Lena came back with a small duffel. Ethan watched her hands. Steady, she was afraid, but she wasn't melting. Shadow padded behind her, nails clicking quietly on tile. When she reached down, Shadow leaned into her touch like it was allowed, like he had decided she belonged. Ethan noticed, filed it away. He walked her upstairs anyway. He checked the stairwell, the hallway, the door to her apartment. Then he waited until the deadbolt slid into place. "Tomorrow," Lena said through the door, her voice muffled. Ethan leaned close enough to be heard. "Tomorrow." He stepped back into the stairwell with Shadow at his heel. The dog looked up once, amber eyes catching the low light. Ethan didn't need words. Something was circling. Morning came gray and wet, the rain shifting into a thin mist that hung low over the sidewalks. The city's skyline was a bruise behind clouds. Traffic sounded like it was moving through water. Officer Ethan Cole sat in his unmarked vehicle 2 blocks from Moore Animal Forensics, coffee cooling in the cup holder because he never drank it while it was hot. Hot meant distracted. Distracted meant dead, eventually. Shadow sat upright in the back seat behind a barrier, harness on, posture calm but ready. Ethan's phone buzzed. "Captain Hayes." He answered on the first ring. "Maria." Captain Maria Hayes didn't waste time. "Tell me you're not parked near her clinic again." Ethan watched the street through the windshield. "I'm parked near her clinic again." A pause, a breath that sounded like Maria was trying to keep her tone from becoming personal. "I told you," she said carefully, "that you're on leave for a reason." Ethan's voice stayed even. "And I told you I'm not good at watching a problem get closer." "Ethan." "Someone's watching her," he said. "Last night, across the street. Not a random." Another pause, longer. Maria's voice lowered. "Any ID?" "No," Ethan said, "but it felt organized." Maria didn't ask what felt meant. She knew Ethan didn't use that word unless the pattern was too complex to reduce quickly. "Okay," she said. "I'm coming." "Bring Lucas," Ethan said. Maria gave a short, humorless sound. "Why?" "Because he asks questions out loud," Ethan replied, "and sometimes people answer him by accident." Maria sighed. "You know he's still a rookie." "He's competent," Ethan said, "and he's hungry." "Fine," Maria said. 20 minutes. Don't do anything dumb." Ethan stared at the clinic's glass front. Define dumb. "I swear to God," Maria muttered, and hung up. Ethan set the phone down. Shadow's ears shifted forward. The first test came fast. A black SUV rolled to the curb in front of the clinic like it owned the street. Not a police vehicle. Too clean, too expensive. Windows tinted dark enough to hide intent. 2 men stepped out first. Broad shoulders, thick necks, the kind of bodies that didn't come from desk jobs. They didn't scan like cops. They scanned like hired men with instructions. Then the third stepped out. He was younger, mid to late 20s, crisp coat, too confident, face that had never been forced to learn humility. He didn't look at the clinic like it was a business. He looked at it like it was a thing he could take. Ethan's hand closed around the steering wheel. Shadow made a low sound, not aggression, recognition of threat. Ethan didn't move immediately. He watched, he listened. The young man walked inside. The bodyguards stayed outside, flanking the door like decorative threats. Ethan's mind went still in that way it did right before action, quiet, cold, focused. He got out of the vehicle. He didn't slam the door. He crossed the street. Inside, the clinic felt different in daylight. Still warm, still clean, still too exposed. Dr. Lena Moore stood behind the counter, posture straight, eyes calm. Ethan could see the tension in her shoulders anyway. He could see the small, controlled breaths. The young man leaned forward, elbows on the counter, like he belonged there. Ethan heard his voice, too loud for a private conversation, designed to be overheard. "Come on," the young man said. "You work too hard. Let me take you somewhere that doesn't smell like bleach." Lena's voice was polite, but clipped. "No?" The young man smiled, like he'd never heard that word as an ending. "I wasn't asking." Ethan stepped into the room. The young man turned, eyes sliding over Ethan's plain clothes, dismissing him in half a second. Then his gaze caught Shadow walking in behind Ethan. Something flickered, interest, then annoyance. "Nice dog," the young man said. "Does it bite?" Shadow stood beside Ethan, head level, ears up, still as a statue. Ethan spoke quietly. "Back up." The young man's smile widened. "Or what?" Ethan didn't answer with bravado. He answered with stillness. Lena's voice cut in. "Please leave." The young man's eyes snapped to her. "You know who I am?" "I don't care," Lena said. That was the problem. People like him needed care, needed fear, needed recognition. When they didn't get it, they had only one language left. He reached for Lena's wrist. Ethan moved, not like a bar fight, not like a hero, like a professional solving a technical problem. He caught the young man's hand mid-reach and turned it, just enough pressure to make pain immediate and options limited. The young man yelped, surprised, not by pain, by consequence. His bodyguards started forward. Shadow took one step, just one. But it was enough. The dog's presence filled the room, a silent wall made of muscle and intent. The bodyguards stopped anyway, not because they feared the dog, because they recognized the type of man who stands with a dog like that. The young man's face flushed. "Do you have any idea?" He wrenched his hand free, more embarrassed than hurt. Then he looked down at Shadow, and he made his choice. He lifted his foot and drove it into Shadow's ribs. The sound wasn't loud. It was worse than loud. It was the dull impact of cruelty landing on something that trusted the world too much. Shadow stumbled, a sharp yelp tearing out of him before he could swallow it back. He recovered fast, faster than any pet would, legs bracing, breath tight. Ethan's vision narrowed. His heartbeat didn't spike like panic. It dropped into a colder rhythm. Lena gasped and moved toward Shadow. "Oh my God, Shadow!" The young man laughed, high and ugly. "Maybe that'll teach." Ethan's hand closed around the young man's shoulder and turned him, hard. The spin wasn't dramatic. It was controlled torque. It put the young man off balance without throwing him. Ethan didn't want a spectacle. He wanted compliance. "You don't do that," Ethan said, voice low. The young man's eyes glittered with humiliation. "You're dead. You understand me? You're—" He reached inside his coat and pulled a handgun, shoving it toward Ethan's face like the gun itself could restore his dominance. Lena froze. Shadow didn't. Shadow's head lowered, a deep vibration building in his chest. Not a bark, not yet, but a warning that the room belonged to teeth if this continued. The bodyguards finally moved. Ethan saw everything at once. The young man's grip too tight, trigger discipline non-existent, muzzle angled wrong, ego driving his breathing. Ethan spoke softly, almost conversational. "You're holding it wrong." The young man blinked. "What?" Ethan took a half step forward. The gun followed, shaking. "Stop!" the young man hissed. "Stop, or I'll—" Ethan moved, a blur to anyone not trained to track it, but to Ethan it was simple mechanics. His left hand slapped the barrel offline. His right hand clamped the young man's wrist and rotated, down and inward, using the joint's weakness against him. Cartilage cracked. The handgun hit the floor. The young man screamed. Ethan didn't let him fall safely. He guided him down, face first into the tile, with a knee between the shoulder blades. Pressure that said, "Stay." Then Ethan picked up the gun, ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber, and set both pieces on the counter where everyone could see them. He looked at the bodyguards. "Back up." The bodyguards stared at him. They didn't move, but they didn't advance either. Lena's hands were on Shadow now, checking ribs with shaking fingers. "Easy, easy." Shadow's breathing was tight, but controlled, eyes bright, not broken. Ethan felt something in his chest shift. Not relief, responsibility. Sirens approached, fast. When the police burst in, the first two officers had weapons raised, eyes wide, voices sharp with adrenaline. "Hands, hands!" Ethan lifted his empty hands slowly. "Weapon is cleared. On the counter. I'm compliant." An older man stepped in behind them. He wasn't wearing captain's stripes, but he moved like someone who had decided long ago what mattered and what didn't. He looked at the young man on the floor, clutching his wrist, crying rage and humiliation. Then the older man's face changed. Fear, recognition, calculation. He holstered his weapon. Ethan watched the shift and understood the whole city in one breath. The older man approached the young man quickly. "Are you all right, sir?" "Sir, not son, not buddy, not, you okay?" "Sir." Ethan's jaw tightened. The young man pointed at Ethan. "Arrest him. He attacked me." Ethan took a small step forward. "He assaulted the doctor and kicked my K9, drew a firearm, multiple witnesses." The older man didn't look at the witnesses. He looked at Ethan. His voice dropped, meant to sound reasonable. "You need to walk away." Ethan stared at him. "You're kidding." The older man's eyes flicked toward the bodyguards, toward the street, toward the invisible web that tightened around names like theirs. "You don't understand how this works," the older man whispered. Ethan's voice stayed flat. "I understand perfectly." He turned to Lena, who was holding Shadow like she could keep the world from touching him again if she gripped tight enough. "Doc," Ethan said quietly, "we're leaving, now." Lena swallowed hard. She looked at the officers, at the older man's fear, and something settled in her eyes. Understanding, not surrender. She nodded once. Ethan guided them out, and as they stepped into the wet daylight, Ethan felt the line draw itself across the pavement. He wasn't just involved anymore. He was in the way. The clinic's door shut behind them with a soft chime that sounded too cheerful for what had just happened. Outside, the air had that Philadelphia damp cold that didn't bite so much as cling. The street smelled like wet brick and car exhaust trapped under low clouds. Lena moved with Shadow pressed close to her thigh, one hand under his chest as if she could physically hold his ribs together by will. Ethan kept them between parked cars, off the open sidewalk. Not because he expected bullets in daylight, because he expected eyes. The older sergeant didn't follow. He didn't have to. In a city like this, the threat didn't wear a uniform. It wore patience. Lena's voice was thin. He actually kicked him. Ethan's gaze tracked reflections in storefront glass, faces, movements, anything that didn't match the morning flow. "Yeah." "And the officers." She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Ethan opened the passenger door of his unmarked vehicle. "Get in." Lena hesitated. "My car?" "Later," Ethan said. "Right now we get Shadow stable." Shadow tried to hop up, pride fighting pain. His paws slipped on the wet floor mat. He huffed, annoyed at his own body. Ethan helped with one hand, firm, careful, efficient, guiding Shadow onto the back seat. Lena slid in, turning to check the dog's breathing like it was a pulse line attached to her own heart. Ethan drove without looking back, eyes scanning mirrors, listening to the engine tone for any vehicle that matched his acceleration too closely. He didn't take the direct route. He took the route that made following obvious. After 2 turns, a car behind them stayed behind them. After 4 turns, it stayed. Ethan's hands didn't tighten. He simply noted. Lena noticed too. "Are we being followed?" Ethan didn't reassure her with lies. "Maybe." "Maybe?" Her voice rose, then caught. "Ethan." He kept his tone low. "Breathe. We're not stopping. We're not cornering ourselves. We're moving to a place that's harder to approach." Lena stared at him. "Harder than my clinic?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. The fact that she had to ask was the problem. Warm places lied. They felt safe. They weren't. He turned down a narrower street with older row houses and tighter sight lines. Parked cars choked the curb. Street trees dripped rain onto the roofs like slow applause. The follower turned too. Ethan exhaled once through his nose and made his call. Captain Maria Hayes picked up on the second ring. "Talk." "Someone's tailing me," Ethan said. A pause. Then, "You in a chase?" "No," he said, not giving them one. "Where are you?" Ethan gave cross streets. "I'm moving toward Lena's clinic, but not direct." Maria's voice sharpened. "Stay mobile. Lucas and I are 10 minutes out." Ethan glanced at the mirror. The follower was still there, a neutral sedan that tried too hard to look normal. "Copy," Ethan said, then quieter. They kicked shadow. Maria's breath changed. It wasn't a gasp, it was a recalibration. "Okay," she said. "Don't do anything that makes headlines. Don't do anything that makes you disappear. Hold until I get there." Ethan hung up. Lena's hands were trembling now as she cradled Shadow's head. He didn't even flinch. "He did," Ethan said. "He flinched. He just didn't run." Shadow's amber eyes shifted toward Ethan at the sound of his voice, then back to Lena. His ears twitched like he was tracking the outside world through the car's skin. Ethan turned again. The follower didn't. They overshot. Too perfect. Ethan's mind slotted the next piece into place. This wasn't random surveillance. It was a probe. Someone checking if he was predictable, if he panicked, if he could be herded. He took them into a small parking lot behind an old hardware store, pulled into a space, and turned off the engine. Lena's head snapped. "Why are we stopping?" "Because I want to see if they stop," Ethan said. "That seems—" "Controlled," Ethan cut in. "Not reckless." Shadow growled low. The sound vibrated through the seats. A second later, the neutral sedan rolled past the lot entrance, slowly, and kept going. No stop, no confrontation, just confirmation. Ethan restarted the engine. "They wanted our direction, now they don't get it." Lena swallowed. Her throat bobbed. "Who was that man?" Ethan didn't say names that didn't exist yet. "Someone who thinks this city belongs to him." Lena stared down at Shadow's ribs. "It does." Ethan's jaw set. "Not today." Back at Moore Animal Forensics, the clinic felt different, like a lighthouse in a storm you could see coming. Ethan parked in the alley behind it, away from the glass frontage. He carried Shadow into the treatment room without speaking, the dog's weight familiar and heavy in his arms. Lena's fear slipped under the surface, and something sharper took its place. Clinical focus. Her hands were steadier now because she had a job. She clipped Shadow's harness loose, guided him onto the stainless steel table. Ethan stood at the doorway, watching the street through blinds, posture loose in the way that only looked loose to people who'd never been in danger. Lena palpated Shadow's ribs with delicate pressure. Shadow winced once, then set his jaw like a soldier refusing to give the enemy satisfaction. "Bruising," Lena said after a moment, voice controlled. "Possible hairline fracture along the floating rib, no obvious internal bleed." Her breath left her in a shaky exhale. "He's tough." Ethan didn't move from the door. "He is!" Lena injected pain relief with practiced care, wrapped Shadow's torso with a compression bandage. Only then did her shoulders drop. The adrenaline leaked out. Her hands trembled again. Ethan turned from the blinds. "Sit." "I'm fine," Lena said automatically. Ethan's eyes didn't soften. They didn't need to. "Sit, Doc." She sat on a stool like she'd been ordered by gravity. Her eyes glistened, frustration and fear mixing into something that looked like anger at herself for being human. "That man," she whispered, "he wasn't just rich. He's connected." Ethan leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Tell me what you know." Lena swallowed. "They call him the Heir, the Thorn Organization. His father's not loud. She searched for words. "He's infrastructure, docks, contracts, unions. He owns things that look clean." "And the police?" Ethan said. Lena gave a bitter sound. "The police breathe when he tells them to." Ethan's gaze returned to the door hinges, the lock, the glass. He assessed in quiet increments. Lena's eyes flicked to him. "You should leave." Ethan looked at her. "No." "You don't understand what you did," she insisted, voice rising. "You humiliated him. In public." Ethan's voice stayed level. "He kicked Shadow." "That's exactly why," she said, pleading now. "That kind of man, he can't lose face." Ethan walked to the front door and tested the lock with one twist. It had too much give. The strike plate was old, screws stripped by years of use. "Do you have a toolbox?" he asked. Lena blinked. "In the closet." He retrieved it without waiting for permission. For the next hour, Ethan did something that looked almost absurd. He made the clinic harder to hurt. He tightened the strike plate, replaced screws with longer ones, reinforced hinges, checked the rear window latch, shifted the filing cabinet so it could wedge behind the side door if needed. It wasn't dramatic. It was domestic warfare. Lena watched him work while she made coffee. The aroma cut through antiseptic. Her eyes tracked Ethan's hands that had broken a wrist with clinical precision, now fixing old hardware like it mattered. "You do this a lot?" she asked softly. Ethan didn't look up. "I fix problems." Lena's voice dropped. "And when you can't?" Ethan paused with the screwdriver mid-turn, then resumed. "Then I make the cost higher." Shadow, sedated but awake, lifted his head. His eyes found Ethan. A slow tail thump against the table. Lena smiled faintly, surprise in it. "He doesn't trust strangers." Ethan finally looked over. The corners of his mouth moved, almost a smile, but not quite. "He's not wrong," Ethan said. Shadow stretched his neck and nudged Ethan's hand. Ethan scratched behind Shadow's ear with 2 fingers, careful not to jostle the ribs. Lena watched the tiny interaction like it was a language she hadn't known existed until today. The warmth lasted maybe 30 seconds. Then the engine sound came. Not a siren, not a delivery truck, something smooth, heavy, expensive. Ethan froze, then moved, silent as a switch flipping. "Stay with Shadow," he said. Lena's spine went rigid. "Ethan, stay," he repeated, and his tone made it law. He went to the front, looked through the glass. A black limousine idled in a no-parking zone like rules were for other people. The rear door opened. A man stepped out, older. Silver hair, charcoal suit, tailored into authority. Not a flashy gangster. Something colder. Something that had learned to win without raising his voice. 2 men flanked him, disciplined, scanning, not like the bodyguards from earlier. Ethan opened the door before the man could knock. He stepped into the threshold and filled it. "We're closed," Ethan said. The older man smiled politely. A smile practiced in boardrooms and funerals. "Mr. Cole," he said smoothly, as if he'd always known Ethan's name. "I apologize for the disturbance." Ethan didn't return the politeness. "Leave." The older man's eyes slid past Ethan toward the clinic interior, toward Lena. "I believe," the man said, "that you met my son today." Ethan's voice stayed low. "I met a man who kicks dogs and draws guns on women." The 2 disciplined guards shifted subtly, tension tightening. The older man lifted a hand, and they settled again. Controlled. "That sounds like him," the older man said with mild resignation, as if cruelty were a character flaw you tolerated in family photos. "He's impulsive." Ethan stared at him. "And you're here to explain impulsive?" The smile thinned. "I'm here to solve problems." He reached into his coat. But it wasn't a gun. It was an envelope. "A check," the older man said, extending it. "For the clinic, for damages, and for you, transport, relocation, whatever you require. A clean exit." Ethan didn't take it. "You think you can buy me?" Ethan asked. The older man's eyes stayed calm. "I think peace has a price. Everything does." Ethan stepped closer, invading space without touching. "And if I don't want peace?" For the first time, the smile vanished. The shark showed itself, not in rage, in certainty. "Then," the older man said softly, "this city becomes dangerous. Gas leaks, electrical fires, brake failures, accidents, tragedies." Ethan's voice dropped until it was almost intimate. "If you come near her again, if your son comes near my partner again, there won't be an accident. There will be a decision." The older man studied Ethan's face. He wasn't reading bravado. He was reading whether Ethan was the kind of man who could follow through without blinking. He saw the answer. Slowly, he slid the envelope back into his pocket. "A soldier with a cause," he murmured. "Noble, foolish." His gaze flicked toward the back room where Shadow lay. "Your weakness is that you care." Ethan didn't react, but his silence sharpened. The older man buttoned his jacket. "Enjoy your stay in Philadelphia, Officer Cole. I have a feeling it will be brief." He turned and walked back to the limousine without hurry. Ethan watched the license plate until it vanished into rain haze. When he closed the clinic door again, it felt like sealing a coffin. That night, Lena tried to sleep upstairs. She didn't. Ethan could tell by the way her footsteps paused at the top of the stairwell, the way the floorboards whispered with hesitation. Ethan stayed downstairs. No lights. He moved through the dark clinic as if he'd memorized it years ago. He didn't need to see. He needed to listen. He wedged the filing cabinet behind the side entrance. He scattered expired glass ampules under the rear window, an ugly carpet of crunch that would speak if anyone stepped wrong. He checked sightlines from behind the exam table, the reception desk, the supply closet. Shadow lay on a rug near reception, head up, ears forward. Bandage wrapped his torso. His breathing was slow, controlled. At 2:07 a.m., Shadow's growl vibrated the floor. Ethan froze. Silence outside, that fake silence that always came right before contact. Then, the scratch of metal on metal at the back door, someone picking the lock. A quiet curse. A boot thudded. The filing cabinet held. A pause, then the sound of shattering glass at the side window. 4 shadows slid inside, then a 5th. These weren't arrogant bodyguards. These men moved in coordinated spreads, low and quiet. Weapons not guns but batons and saps, tools designed for breaking without the complication of murder. The leader signaled toward the stairs. Ethan didn't let them reach Lena. He launched from the dark like an answer. He hit the first intruder with a palm strike to the jaw, clean, precise, dropping him before he could grunt. He swept the second man's legs and drove an elbow into his solar plexus. Breath stolen, fight stolen with it. The third rushed with a pipe. Ethan sidestepped, caught the arm, and used momentum to throw him into the metal shelving unit. Instruments crashed, but the noise didn't help the intruders. It only told them they were losing. Shadow barked once, a harsh, sharp sound that made the intruders flinch, disoriented by the darkness and the sudden violence. 2 attackers moved together, trying to overwhelm. Ethan dropped to one knee, shouldered one into the exam table, then pivoted and smashed the other into the drywall partition with a controlled shove that turned ribs into regret. The last man hesitated. That pause was fatal. Ethan crossed the distance in 2 strides, grabbed the vest, and threw him through the waiting room doorway like a body was just physics. The clinic settled into a new silence, heavy, wet, broken by groans. The leader, bleeding from a cut, tried to stand. Ethan hauled him up and pinned him to the wall, forearm pressing into his throat. The leader's eyes widened. Not fear of death, fear of being handled by someone who had mastered it. Ethan's voice was low. "You're going to deliver a message?" The leader nodded frantically. "Tell Thorne," Ethan whispered. "He sent wolves." He forgot to check if a shepherd was home. Ethan released him. The leader collapsed, gasping. One by one, the intruders dragged each other out, limping into the night, leaving their confidence behind with the broken glass. Ethan watched them go until the street swallowed them. Shadow moved to the foot of the stairs, a silent guard. Lena appeared at the landing, baseball bat in hand, eyes wide. She took in the shattered window, the overturned shelves, the unconscious men Ethan had already zip-tied. Ethan looked up at her. The adrenaline had faded, leaving only tired certainty. "Go back to bed," he said gently. "They won't come back tonight." Lena's grip tightened on the bat. "You don't know that." Ethan's eyes didn't lie. "I know enough." They both knew what he didn't say. This was the first skirmish. Morning light filtered through plywood over the broken window. It didn't warm anything. It just revealed damage in honest detail. Lena swept glass into a dustpan, jaw clenched, movements furious because anger was easier than shaking. Ethan sat in the corner with his phone in hand, staring at a number he hadn't dialed in a long time. Lena glanced over. "Who are you calling?" "Someone who doesn't work for this city," Ethan said. The line connected on the 3rd ring. A voice answered, sharp, guarded. "This line is for emergencies." Ethan allowed a small grim curve in his mouth. "It's an emergency, Lucas." Deputy Lucas Reed's tone shifted instantly. "Ethan, you're not supposed to have this number." Ethan stared at the plywood. "Then don't answer next time." Lucas exhaled. "What happened?" Ethan gave him a concise report. Park incident, local police pressure, intimidation visit, overnight assault. On the other end, Lucas went quiet, absorbing. Then his voice lowered. "Thorne is a big fish. We've been trying to pin him to something real for years. He's clean on paper, but the air isn't," Ethan said. Lucas inhaled. "We've heard rumors of a side operation at the port, high risk. If you can get hard proof, shipping manifests, buyer lists, anything, it can trigger a task force. But we don't move on rumors." Ethan's eyes stayed cold. "I can get proof." Lucas hesitated. "Ethan, don't—" "I'm not asking permission," Ethan said. "I'm asking what you need." Lucas swallowed words he couldn't say. "Hard evidence. Digital if possible. Names, dates, routes." Ethan nodded once as if Lucas could see it. "Send me what you've got on access points." "I'll text," Lucas said. "And Ethan?" "Yeah. Don't die," Lucas said, trying for humor and failing. Ethan ended the call. Lena watched him like he was a storm forming inside a person. "You're going after them." Ethan didn't deny it. "I'm stopping them." "You're one man," Lena said. Ethan looked at Shadow, who was watching the door with quiet vigilance. No. That evening, the clinic felt less like a business and more like a bunker that smelled like coffee. Lena insisted on cleaning a gash Ethan had earned in the night fight. Ethan sat on the exam table, arm extended, expression blank like pain was an irrelevant detail. Lena cleaned the wound with careful hands. "You ignored this." Ethan watched her focus. "I noticed it." "That's not the same," she said. Ethan didn't answer. He listened to the refrigerator hum, the distant city noise muffled by rain. This closeness was dangerous, not because she would betray him, because it made him care in a way that could be used. Lena's voice softened, almost pleading. "You could leave." Ethan's gaze flicked toward Shadow, asleep near the door, still guarding, even in rest. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Lena's fingers paused on his skin. "Why?" Ethan's voice dropped. "Because they don't stop on their own." She finished the bandage and stepped back, eyes searching his face like she might find an answer that made sense without violence. Ethan didn't have one. At midnight, Ethan moved. He left Shadow in the clinic with Lena upstairs. He slipped into the port district dressed in black. No insignia, no ego, just function. The docks were a maze of stacked shipping containers, steel canyons that swallowed sound and light. He moved through shadows, stepping where cameras couldn't see, timing patrols by the rhythm of their footsteps. Lucas's intel had been enough. The sector was heavier armed than typical dock security. That was confirmation. Ethan reached a row of containers near the water and smelled something that didn't belong. Musk, damp sawdust, fear. He picked a lock quietly and cracked the door an inch. The sound that leaked out wasn't metal or machinery. It was the distressed cry of an animal. Ethan's stomach went cold. He shone a low red light inside. Cages stacked to the ceiling, birds with wild eyes, small mammals curled into balls, a larger crate set deeper back that made his skin crawl with the implication of its size. This wasn't drugs. This wasn't weapons. It was something worse, living contraband, suffering packaged for profit. Ethan closed the container and moved toward a portable office trailer on cinder blocks. Command center. Empty, except for a computer and paperwork. He gained entry through the skylight and dropped soundlessly onto the floor. The computer was locked, but Ethan had tools. He plugged in a drive, old field expedient gear from a life he was trying not to live anymore. The progress bar crawled, copying ledgers, manifests, buyer lists. His ears caught footsteps on the metal stairs outside. Voices. A handle rattled. Ethan pulled the drive out as the lock clicked. He had no back exit. The skylight was too high to reach quickly. He slid behind a stack of filing cabinets as the door opened. The air stepped in with a heavy guard. Ethan didn't need their names. He needed their behaviors. The air scanned the room, his eyes narrowed. "Did you leave that chair out?" he asked. The guard frowned. "No, boss." The air drew a pistol, matte black, practical now, less show, more intent. "Search," he snapped. Ethan didn't wait to be found. He exploded from behind cover, shoulder checking the guard into the air, buying a half second. He didn't stay to fight. He launched through the plate glass window, shattered it, rolled onto the asphalt outside. Alarms erupted, spotlights swept, bullets sparked off pavement behind him. Ethan sprinted toward the container stacks and climbed like gravity was a suggestion. He moved up and across steel surfaces with the agility of a man who had spent years learning how to survive impossible spaces. He reached the top of a 4-high stack. The warehouse roof was 15 feet away, an ugly gap. Boots clanged behind him. No choice. He sprinted and launched. For a moment, he was weightless. Then his chest slammed into the roof edge. Air left his lungs. Fingers scrabbled for purchase. He slipped, dangling 40 feet above concrete. He engaged core and rage, hauled himself up as bullets chipped stone where his head had been. He rolled into darkness. The drive burned in his pocket like a fuse. He had evidence. Now he had to stay alive. The city's skyline looked clean from a distance. That was the lie. Ethan watched it from the roofline of the warehouse, rain misting his face, heart rate already back down to a level that would have looked wrong on anyone else. He lay flat, letting the gravel bite through his shirt. Below, the port district erupted in a confused search pattern, guards fanning out, flashlights slicing through container alleys, radios crackling with panic. They were hunting a shape. Ethan was a habit. He moved when the sweep shifted away, sliding into a darker channel between ventilation stacks. He didn't run. Running made sound. Running made urgency visible. He went still, then went silent, then went gone. By the time he dropped from the far side of the roof and disappeared into a row of abandoned loading bays, the guards were still shouting at shadows. Their fear would do the rest of the work. Fear made men sloppy. Sloppy made proof easier to use. Ethan made it back to the clinic without leading anyone home. He checked for tails twice, took a wider route, cut through streets where the lights were broken and the cameras were blind. When he stepped into more animal forensics, the warmth hit him like something indecent, like the building was pretending it could protect itself with comfort. Shadow's head lifted immediately. The dog was still bandaged, still moving stiffly, but his ears pinned forward, eyes alert, tracking Ethan's breathing, his smell, the faint metallic trace of the port that clung to him. Lena came down the stairs in socks, bat in hand again, like it was a talisman. Her eyes took in Ethan's wet clothes, the small streak of blood at his collar where the window glass had kissed him on the way out. Her mouth opened. Ethan spoke first. "I have it." Lena's voice was rough. "What did you do?" Ethan didn't explain with a story. He explained with a fact. They're trafficking living contraband through the port. Records, buyer lists, routes. Lena stared at him. Animals? Ethan's gaze didn't flinch. Animals! Her eyes watered, but she blinked it back hard. How can anyone... Ethan's tone stayed flat. Because they can. Shadow rose and limped over, pressing his flank against Ethan's leg. Not a cuddle, a check-in, a confirmation. Ethan put 2 fingers on Shadow's shoulder. Steady pressure. Calm signal. Lena noticed anyway, the way Ethan touched Shadow like a teammate. She swallowed. "Lucas?" Ethan nodded. "I'm getting it to him." Lena exhaled, shaky. "Then it's over." Ethan didn't give her that lie either. He looked at the glass frontage of the clinic, at the street beyond it. "No," he said. "Now it starts." The next day, the world above Thorne's influence felt colder than the weather. Ethan sat behind the reception desk with Lena's laptop open, transferring files, encrypting copies, leaving no obvious trail. Lucas had sent secure instructions. Ethan followed them like a checklist. Shadow slept with one eye open. Lena moved through the clinic pretending it was a normal day. Inventory, paperwork, sedation logs, because pretending was the only way to keep fear from eating her alive. By late afternoon, Ethan's phone buzzed. "Lucas, task force can't move until chain is clean. Don't let them know you have it." Ethan stared at the words. Don't let them know. They already knew. You didn't have to be a genius to know the port breach would ripple upward. Guards would report. Someone would connect the chair position. Someone would notice a manifest copy accessed at the wrong time. Someone would understand that the stranger from the clinic wasn't just brave. He was leverage. Ethan replied with 2 words. "Too late." He looked at Lena. "You're not leaving alone." Lena's jaw set. "I have to get supplies, food, bandages. Shadow." "I'll go," Ethan said. Lena shook her head. "If you go, they see you. If they see you, they know you're staying." Ethan didn't argue. He adjusted. "Then we go together." Lena's eyes flashed. "That's worse." Ethan's gaze didn't move. "We don't split." The silence between them was thick with the thing they weren't saying. This wasn't just about evidence anymore. It was about control, and Thorne didn't lose control, not without taking something. Lena nodded once. Fine, 4 blocks, in and out. Ethan clipped Shadow's lead to his harness. Shadow limped, but he moved with stubborn purpose, as if pain were a problem he would simply outlast. They took the route with the most eyes. Busy street, afternoon traffic. People who didn't look up unless something screamed. Ethan scanned everything anyway. Reflections, open car doors, hands in pockets, the way a man paused at a corner too long. They made it to the market. Lena moved fast, grabbing supplies like muscle memory, not browsing. Shadow's ears twitched constantly. The dog's world was scent and vibration. He knew something was wrong before Ethan did. Shadow stiffened. Ethan followed his line of attention, toward the curb where a van had pulled in too smoothly. Side door already open a crack. Ethan's body went cold. "Lena," he said quietly. She turned, basket in hand, confusion on her face. And then 2 men moved. Fast, professional. No shouting, no drama. Just hands on Lena's arms, forcing her toward the van's open mouth. Lena's basket hit the pavement. Oranges rolled like small, bright warnings. Shadow lunged. Pain or no pain, Shadow hit the nearest attacker low, shoulder into knee. The man grunted, stumbling. The second attacker swung a baton, controlled, vicious, and brought it down on Shadow's head. The sound made Ethan's vision snap into a narrow tunnel. Shadow collapsed into the grass verge with a whimper that didn't sound like a dog. It sounded like betrayal. "No!" Lena screamed, fighting, twisting. Then an arm hooked her throat and dragged her backward. Ethan moved, but the van door slammed, tires spun. The vehicle surged forward, vanishing into traffic like it belonged there. Ethan stood in the middle of the street for half a second, eyes tracking the last glimpse of the license plate through rain haze. Then he dropped to his knees beside Shadow. Blood matted fur behind Shadow's ear. Shadow's breathing was steady but strained, eyes glassy, struggling to focus. Ethan's hands moved over Shadow's skull with the same practiced efficiency he'd used on wounded humans. Pressure. Assessment. Control. Shadow's eyes fluttered, then locked onto Ethan. A sharp bark, weak, furious, then a whine, gaze darting toward the empty road where Lena had been. Shadow was trying to speak. Ethan's throat tightened. "I know," he whispered, voice thick but controlled. "You tried." He pulled a trauma dressing from his pocket, he never went anywhere without one, and pressed it against the wound. Blood soaked into white, turning it pink, then red. Ethan lifted Shadow carefully, cradling him like weight was irrelevant. As he carried Shadow back toward the clinic, something inside Ethan hardened into ice. This wasn't anger anymore, this was a decision. Back at the clinic, Ethan moved with brutal focus. He sedated Shadow enough to keep him still, stitched the laceration with fast, clean stitches, set up fluids. He laid Shadow in the recovery kennel on a soft bed and covered him with a blanket. Shadow's eyes tried to stay open, fighting sedation. Ethan leaned close. "Rest," he murmured. "I'm bringing her back." Shadow's tail made one faint thump against the bedding. Agreement or trust, or both. Then Lena's phone rang. Ethan had found it on the floorboard of her car earlier when they'd returned from a previous run. Now it buzzed on the counter like an accusation. Unknown number. Video call. Ethan stared at it, then answered. The screen filled with an older man in a cold office. Silver hair, charcoal suit, eyes like stone. Thorne. "Officer Cole," Thorne said smoothly. "I assume you found the dog?" Ethan didn't speak. Silence was sometimes the sharpest response. Thorne's smile tightened. He turned the camera. Lena was on screen, tied to a chair, duct tape over her mouth, bruise blooming on her cheek. Her eyes were wide, but they were still alive. Behind her stood a large man with a scar down his jaw, holding a gun to her head. Ethan's pulse jumped, then settled. Threat, variable, solution. "If you touch her again," Ethan said, voice flat, "you won't be buried deep enough to be forgotten." Thorne chuckled softly. "Spare me the poetry. We have a transaction. You have something of mine, evidence." Ethan's eyes didn't move from the screen. "And you have something of hers." "Correct," Thorne said. "Old smelting foundry, industrial district. Bring the drive. Come alone. No police, no friends. If I see a badge, she dies." Ethan didn't bargain. Bargaining made him emotional. Emotion made him predictable. "I'll be there," Ethan said. Thorne leaned closer to the camera. 1 hour. The screen went black. Ethan stood in the quiet clinic, staring at his reflection in the dead phone screen. Then he moved. He went to the back room, lifted a floorboard that didn't look like it lifted, pulled out a duffel bag that didn't belong in a veterinarian clinic. Inside were tools Ethan had sworn he was done with: zip ties, breaching tool, flashbangs, a mat-suppressed pistol, and a tactical vest that smelled faintly of oil and old sand. He didn't gear up like a man excited to fight. He geared up like a man putting on a uniform for work. When he was ready, he walked to Shadow's kennel. "Stay," Ethan said softly. Shadow was already standing. The kennel door unlatched. Shadow swayed slightly, still groggy. Bandage around his head had stark against black and tan fur. But his eyes were clear. He stepped out and pressed his flank against Ethan's leg. Tactile anchor, statement of partnership. Ethan's voice was low, almost angry. "You're hurt?" Shadow ignored it. Shadow's low rumble wasn't aggression. It was commitment. Ethan crouched, checked the stitches one last time, adjusted the harness to avoid pressure on ribs. "Okay," Ethan whispered. "We move as one." Shadow's tail thumped once. The smelting foundry sat near the river like a skeleton of the city's industrial past. Rusted steel ribs, crumbling brick, open wounds where windows used to be. Fog rolled off the water, wrapping the structure in a damp shroud that swallowed sound. Ethan parked a mile away and approached on foot. No headlights, no noise. Shadow took point, nose working, ears swiveling. Every few yards, Shadow froze, alerting Ethan to patrols before they came into view. At the perimeter fence, a guard smoked under a flickering light, bored and relaxed. Ethan squeezed Shadow's shoulder. "Wait." Ethan moved behind the guard like the man had been standing alone specifically for him. One hand over mouth, pressure applied. 10 seconds later, the guard slumped unconscious. Ethan zip-tied him and dragged him into Shadow. Shadow didn't bark. Shadow didn't celebrate. They flowed forward. Inside the foundry yard, patrols moved in patterns. Shadow read them. Ethan erased them. No gunfire. No shouting. Just the quiet collapse of resistance. They slipped in through a maintenance hatch Ethan had identified earlier. Inside, the foundry was cavernous. Catwalks, hanging chains, dead machinery. Dust and cold metal smell. Portable floodlights glared in the center, illuminating a temporary command post. Men with rifles, radios, discipline. Ethan crouched on a high catwalk and looked down through the grate. He saw the scarred mercenary pacing near a table. He saw the air in a glass-walled office above, moving like a caged animal. He didn't see Lena, which meant she was deeper. Ethan didn't rush. Rush got people killed. He moved along the catwalk to the main utility panel. Old system rigged with new power lines for lights. He didn't just cut power. That was too clean. He lit a flare and jammed it into the fire suppression sensor. Then he killed the main breaker. The lights died. The fire alarm began to wail, mechanical, deafening. Sprinklers erupted, water hammering down, turning dust into mud, steam rising as cold met old heat. Chaos hit the defenders like a wave. "Hold fire!" the mercenary screamed. "Get flashlights! Secure the prisoner!" Beams of light cut wildly through steam. This was Ethan's element. He dropped from the catwalk on a chain, landing behind two guards whose lights were aimed at the wrong darkness. Ethan struck. One guard went down with a knee to the chest. The other slammed into scrap metal with a muffled grunt. Shadow moved through steam like a shadow with teeth. Shadow didn't bite for sport. He used his body weight, his timing, knocking knees out, pinning arms, creating openings for Ethan to finish. One by one, voices cut off mid-sentence. Fear spread. Men started shooting at movement that wasn't there. Bullets sparked against iron pillars. The air watched from above, hands shaking, face drained. His men were vanishing into steam like they were being pulled into the building itself. The mercenary's radio hissed. "It's him!" the mercenary gasped. "He's taking us apart!" Ethan didn't chase screams. He moved toward where Lena would be kept. Back rooms, storage, anywhere hidden. He found a door guarded by two men. Shadow froze, ears forward. Ethan squeezed Shadow's shoulder. "Go!" Shadow lunged, knocking the first guard off balance. Ethan took the second guard down with a baton strike to the wrist, disarming him, then pinned him with a knee. He opened the door. Inside, the air smelled like oil and cold sweat. Lena was there, tied to a chair, duct tape still over her mouth. bruise on her cheek darker now, eyes wide but steady enough to lock on to Ethan like she'd been holding her hope in a fist. Ethan moved fast, cutting ties with a knife, ripping tape away gently so he didn't tear skin. "Can you walk?" he asked. Lena's voice was hoarse. "Yes." Shadow pressed his nose into Lena's hand. Lena's fingers curled into his fur like she was grabbing reality. Then the building shifted. A new presence. Ethan's instincts flared. He turned. Silas Thorne stepped into the doorway like he owned the smoke. Flanked by 4 elite guards, matching gear, disciplined posture, rifles up. Silas looked at the steam, the fallen men, the chaos, and still managed a calm smile. "I must admit," Silas said, voice echoing, "you're more resourceful than I anticipated." Ethan didn't answer. He stepped between Silas and Lena without thinking. Shadow's growl rolled low, constant, like a warning siren under the noise. Silas lifted his hand. "Kill him!" The 4 guards raised rifles in unison. Ethan didn't seek cover. He threw his last flashbang at the floor in front of them. White light, deafening crack. The guards flinched. Ethan surged forward. Close quarters violence, fast surgical. First guard, rifle deflected, palm strike to chin, down. Second guard. Shadow launched, jaws clamped the forearm, rifle dropped, man dragged. Third guard, knee destroyed, pistol whip ended the fight. Fourth guard managed to aim. Ethan fired from the hip, round striking shoulder, sending him into chains. Silence returned under the sprinklers. Silas's composure cracked. He reached into his jacket. Ethan's pistol rose, but Ethan didn't fire. He holstered instead and walked forward. "You have nothing I want," Ethan said, voice like stone. Above, in the glass office, the air panicked, shoving cash and devices into a briefcase. He looked down at his father, cornered, and snapped. He grabbed his pistol and rushed to the glass, aiming at Ethan's back. Lena saw it first. "Ethan, behind you!" Ethan didn't turn fully. He saw the reflection in wet steel, processed it in a millisecond. He spun and dropped to one knee, drawing and firing a single shot. Not lethal. The bullet struck the pistol slide, ripping the weapon from the heir's hand and shattering it into metal shards. The heir screamed, clutching his hand, collapsing to his knees. Ethan turned back to Silas. Silas backed into a support pillar, trembling. Ethan grabbed him by the lapels and slammed him against steel. "Kneel!" Ethan commanded. Silas hesitated. Ethan kicked the back of Silas's leg, forcing him into the mud. "It's over," Ethan said. "This city doesn't belong to you." Silas spat words through fear. "The police are mine. The judges are mine. I'll be out by morning." Ethan leaned close. "Not this time." The foundry doors exploded inward. A concussive blast, debris raining. Floodlights and weapon lights swept in. "Federal agents, drop your weapons!" Deputy Lucas Reed led the entry with a ballistic shield, raid jacket on, eyes scanning. He took in the scene. Elite guards down, Silas kneeling, Ethan standing with Lena behind him, and Shadow at his heel. Lucas lowered his shield slowly and walked toward Ethan, a grim smile tugging at his mouth despite the chaos. "I told you to get evidence," Lucas said. "I didn't tell you to start a war." Ethan's eyes flicked to Lena, then to Shadow, bandaged, panting, still standing. "They started it," Ethan said quietly. "I finished it." Lucas exhaled, then had turned and signaled his team. Agents moved in, cuffs snapping onto Silas's wrists, pulling the air from his glass cage, securing the mercenary. The Thorne organization's power collapsed not with a whisper, but with hard metal and paperwork. Evidence, process. In a city built on fear, Ethan had used the one weapon fear couldn't bribe. Truth that could be proven. 3 days later, the clinic's small television played the kind of news that changed local history. Silas Thorne in an orange jumpsuit, the heir weeping, arrogance gone, seized assets, corrupt officials exposed, federal charges stacked like bricks, racketeering, trafficking, conspiracy. Lena stood with a coffee tray, watching the footage with her hands steady but her eyes tired. Shadow lay on his bed, bandage smaller now, stitches clean. He lifted his head when Ethan moved, tracking him like he didn't want the man to disappear without notice. Captain Maria Hayes stood near the door, arms crossed, expression pragmatic, but relief sat under it like a hidden pulse. "You're impossible," Maria said to Ethan. Ethan didn't deny it. "You're welcome." Maria's mouth twitched. "Lucas says you did half the job for them." Ethan looked at the blank TV screen after he turned it off. "They did their job. I just gave them the key." Maria studied him. "You going back?" Ethan's gaze shifted to his packed bag by the door. "Yeah." Lena's voice came soft. "When?" Ethan checked his watch. 2 hours. The silence that followed wasn't heavy the way fear was. It was the silence of something ending before you were ready. Lena stepped closer. She looked up at Ethan, eyes searching his face, not for promises, but for reality. "You saved us," she said. Ethan shook his head slightly. "You saved yourself. I just leveled the field." Lena's lips pressed together, emotion rising. "That's not nothing." Shadow stood and moved to Ethan, pressing his head into Ethan's knee with a long sigh. Ethan's hand sank into Shadow's fur, scratching behind the ears, exactly where Shadow wanted it. "Hold the line," Ethan murmured to Shadow, voice gentle. Shadow's tail thumped. Lena's fingers found Ethan's hand on Shadow's head, warm, steady. "I don't know what happens to people who stand up to men like that," Lena said quietly. Ethan met her eyes. "They get targeted." "And you still did it?" she whispered. Ethan's voice was low, because someone had to. Lena took a breath, measured, like a woman making a decision the way Ethan did, without drama, without self-pity. "How long?" she asked. Ethan hesitated. This part felt more dangerous than any fight. 6 months, he said. "One last rotation." Lena nodded once. "Then I'll be here." Ethan tried to give her an out. "You don't have to." "I know," she cut in gently, "but I will." Shadow nudged Ethan's hand again, as if sealing the agreement with blunt canine certainty. Ethan exhaled, something loosening in his chest that had been tight for years. He leaned down and pressed a brief kiss to Lena's forehead. No grand gesture, no performance, just a promise made with proximity. He knelt in front of Shadow, looked into amber eyes that had stared down cruelty without breaking. "Watch over her," Ethan said. "Hold the line until I get back." Shadow licked his face, wet, sloppy, undeniable affection. Ethan stood, grabbed his bag, and walked out into the crisp afternoon. Philadelphia's air felt different now, not because the city had changed, but because something in Ethan had. He drove toward the airport without looking back. Not because he was leaving them behind, because for the first time in a long time he wasn't leaving for good.